In vino veritas, in wine truth. That was Pliny the Elder's fancy way of saying, give me a few glasses of wine and I'll really tell you what I think of you. So, you can't get mad at me if I get a little mouthy after just a few glasses of this Conditum Paradoxum, the incredible spiced wine of ancient Rome. So a big thank you to Bright Cellars for not only sponsoring this video, but for actually giving me the idea to do it in the first place. Conditum Paradoxum and the wines of ancient Rome. This time on Drinking History. The ancient Romans loved their wine, and they really enjoyed zhuzhing it up a little. Sometimes because they had to, like when they would add a bit of salt water to wine that was getting ready to turn into vinegar just to make it more palatable, or sometimes they would just want to change the flavor up, like when they would add herbs and spices to make a wine more complex. Most often they would sweeten it. They loved their sweet wines. Sometimes they would add mustum or grape must, the best version being boiled in a pot, preferably made of lead, so you get that extra sweet taste that only lead can provide. But safer and more common was just to add honey, like this recipe from Bacchus for Conditum Paradoxum, which translates to incredible spiced wine. Put 15 pounds of honey in a bronze vessel into which you have already put 2 pints of wine. Heat it over a slow fire, stirring with a stick as it cooks. When it is cooled, heat it again. This must be done a second and third time, then remove it from the fire and skim it the next day. Then add 4 ounces of ground pepper, 3 scooples of ground mastic, a dram each of aromatic leaf and saffron, 5 roasted date pits, and the same dates softened in wine and pounded. When this is prepared, add 18 pints of light wine. If it is bitter, add charcoal. Now obviously the main ingredient other than the honey is the wine, and it's hard to decide on exactly which wine to use because while many have guessed what wine tasted like back in ancient Rome, nobody really will ever know. Plus, there were tons of varieties, just like today, many of which we will talk about. But for this recipe, since it calls for a light wine, I've decided to use a Pinot Grigio sent to me from our sponsor, Bright Cellars. Now, Bright Cellars has sponsored my videos before, but in this case, they actually gave me the idea to do this video. You should do an episode on ancient Roman wine. By Jove, I think that's a smashing idea. Not exactly sure why I'm always English in my memories, but there it is. Anyway, when they gave me this idea, I said, okay, sounds great, but I only want wines sent to me from areas that were the ancient Roman Empire. And their concierge service said, okay. They sent me Alanim from Spain, then a Montepulciano called Ladro d'Ulva, but I decided to go with a Pinot Grigio from Pavia, and most of it, of course, is in our recipe today, but I saved a little bit back so I could try it sans paradoxum. Let's give it a go. It's interesting because it's already a little, you can taste the honey. There is no honey in it yet. We're about to add some, but it has that crisp honey. Oh, I get apple. It's really wonderful. I like Pinot Grigio. Now, when you start with Bright Cellars, it's best to take their 7-question quiz and let them curate your wines for you. They're also super flexible. You can skip a month or you can get extra to take to all of the holiday parties that you're going to. Frankly, if I show up to Christmas dinner without a bottle of wine, my mom will send me home. And a subscription to Bright Cellars is an excellent gift and one that nobody is going to want to return. And right now, Bright Cellars is giving 50% off of your first 6-bottle box plus a bonus bottle. 7 bottles for $53 when you use the link in the description. Now that we have our bottle of wine, what else we need for this recipe is 2/3 of a cup or 225 grams of honey. I'm using raw unfiltered honey, but you can use regular clarified honey. It doesn't matter. A half teaspoon of ground black pepper, a pinch of mastic powder. So mastic is a gum or resin that comes from the mastic tree grown on the island of Chios in Greece. It starts off bitter, but then it gets this sweet pine flavor, and it's kind of like walking through a forest. It's really wonderful, but in moderation. Then either a pinch of ground spikenard or bayleaf. The original word in the recipe is very unclear, and people debate which leaf this is. Some people say bayleaf, some people say spikenard. That's going to be a lot harder to find, though we used it in the recipe on Hippocras, which was another spiced wine, so maybe a link there. I don't know. Either one is going to be fine though. A pinch of ground saffron threads, and 1 date and its accompanying pit. So soak the date in a bit of wine and set the date pit in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 15 minutes. Also, you'll notice I'm only using 1 instead of 5 because I've cut this way down. It's a huge recipe. I'm just making 1 bottle instead of like a vat. Then put the honey in a saucepan and stir in 1/3 cup or 75 milliliters of the wine and set it over medium-low heat and bring to a simmer, making sure it doesn't boil over. You want to let it simmer for about 5 minutes, then take it off and let it cool, and then return it to the heat, heat it up, let it simmer, take it off. You're going to do this 3 times. If anything floats to the top, skim it out. You probably won't need to if you're using commercial honey and commercial wine, but if there is, get rid of it. Then take the date pit and grind it. It's really hard to grind a date pit. Pretty much impossible to get it like into a powder unless you have, I don't know what kind of machinery, but doing it by hand, I was able after a while and with all my strength to get it into shards, and that's just gonna have to be fine. Then add in the spices and the date and mash until you have a paste. Then add that to the honey mixture and stir until well combined. Then pour in the remainder of the wine, including that in which you soaked the date, and cover it and let it rest overnight. Now, it's often thought that doing this to a wine, this whole process, was a way to make an inferior wine taste better, but the ingredients used are so expensive that it's unlikely the household doing this would even have inferior wine. And there are records that say that this type of drink was often made with the best wine that one could find. And that raises the question, what were some of those wines? Now, there's no way that we can discuss all of the wines of ancient Rome in one video. Pliny the Elder says there were 80 that he considered high quality alone. So just think of how many there were that were not high quality. So today we will be focusing on just that top tier of wine, mainly because that's what was written most about. Now, in the early Republic, the most prized wine in Rome did not come from Rome. Just like the wines that I ordered from Bright Cellars are all Old World wine, so were the wines that the Romans enjoyed at the beginning. But their Old World meant Greece. And it wasn't just the wine, but the art and culture of the Greeks that were invading Roman society. And that really irked our old friend Cato the Elder, who hated to see Rome embracing all that was Greek. And after the sack of Syracuse, the Greek city, he said, "The vanquished have conquered us, not we them." But then again, Cato was a grump. Most people welcomed this Greek influence, specifically wine from the Isle of Chios, the same place from which we get our mastic. Chian wine became the rarest and most precious of wines during the early Republic, and it was so expensive that often during a big banquet, everyone would get a sip before moving to the less expensive wines. And it's interesting because it's one of the few fine wines in ancient Rome that was red instead of the more popular white. The Greek historian Theopompus said that it was actually the first red wine, which he called black wine. It's doubtful, but who's going to question him? Not me. I'm also not going to question Pliny the Elder, who hailed both the wine's flavor and medicinal properties. Now, much of what we know about the wine of ancient Rome comes from Pliny the Elder, who was revolutionary in many of his ideas on wine, specifically an idea that today the French call terroir. These examples, if I am not greatly mistaken, will go far to prove that it is the land and the soil that is of primary importance, and not the grape, as the same vine transplanted to several places is productive of features and characteristics of quite opposite natures. And for him, the land and soil that produced great wine was mostly Italy and not Greece. Though some of the wines that he talks about get mixed reviews, I guess back then people's palates differed just like they do now. Columella had said that the wine from Sorrentinum holds first place in the excellence of wine. But Pliny said that while it's good for the sick due to its thinness, its flavor leaves something to be desired. And Emperor Tiberius believed it to be no less than a conspiracy among physicians to even call it wine, as he said that it was nothing more than fancy vinegar, which sounds about like the wine that I used to drink in college. And even Columella, who did like it, said that it was only good after it had been aged 15 to 25 years. Now, this idea of wine being medicinal and having other qualities besides flavor to recommend them was very important in ancient Rome. The Empress Livia lived well into her 80s and was asked what her secret was. She attributed her longevity to the wine of Puccinum, as she never drank any other. Livia's husband, the Emperor Augustus, on the other hand, preferred the wine known as Cetinum. It was known to have a sharpness and taste of figs and was best served diluted and chilled with snow. But it wasn't the flavor that recommended it. Rather, it was because there is no danger of indigestion and flatulence resulting from the use of this wine. Now, Augustus had a man working for him who was a bit like a sommelier and would choose his wines for him, and he was a bit of a wine snob. One time, while they were visiting someone's estate, he was doing a tasting of the wine from that area, and he said To the owner of the estate, the taste of this wine is new to me, and it is by no means of first-rate quality. The emperor, however, you will see, will drink of no other. You can almost hear the eye roll. Now, the most famous wine of ancient Rome, perhaps because it is the most written about wine, but also because it is one of the best, was called Falernian. There is no wine that ranks higher than the Falernian. It is the only one, too, among all the wines that takes fire on the application of flame. Clearly highly alcoholic, almost to the point of incredulity. But it wasn't the strength of the wine, but its pedigree that made it so prized. Originally, Mount Massico, south of Neapolis, modern-day Naples, was bare, with just enough grass to graze a few cows belonging to the farmer named Falernus. Well, one night, Bacchus, the god of wine, came looking for a place to rest, and the poor farmer let him stay at his place and gave him what bread and milk he had. Well, Bacchus, being Bacchus, took the milk and turned it into wine, and they drank until they passed out. The next morning, when the farmer woke up, probably with a hangover, Bacchus was gone, but his mountain was draped in a canopy of grapevines to make more wine. Now, there were three types of this Falernian wine, which Pliny described as the rough, the sweet, and the thin. And it was that middle one, the sweet, that was the most famous and probably the most flammable. It was called Faustian Falernian. And this wine had to be aged for at least 10 years until it became golden and sweet like honey. And I'm guessing it was something like a sauterne or maybe an ice wine, one of the very rich dessert wines of today. It was extremely expensive and so available really only to the very wealthy, which is probably why most historians think that it was a fraudulent Falernian that was for sale at a tavern in Pompeii. The menu saying, for 1 coin you can drink wine, for 2 you can drink the best, for 4 you can drink Falernian. Though it was surely a real Falernian that the fictional character Trimalchio from Satyricon served to his guests to impress them. Carefully sealed wine bottles were immediately brought forth, on the necks of which labels had been attached with the title Falernian, Consulship of OPIMIUS, 100 years old. While they were examining the labels, Trimalchio clapped his hands and said, "Ah, so wine has a longer life than us poor folks, so let's soak it up. Wine is life. I'm giving you real Opimian. I didn't put out such good stuff yesterday, and a much classier crowd was eating dinner." Such a jerk. But the bottle would have been quite remarkable, because not only was it a Falernian, it was Opimian, which was a specific vintage from 121 BC named after the consul at the time, OPIMIUS. This vintage was served by Julius Caesar to celebrate his conquest of Spain, and a 160-year-old bottle was given to Caligula in 39 AD. Though some say that by this time it had become so thick that it was pretty much undrinkable, but still really fancy. Though as high and mighty as this Falernian was, we can always count on the stoic Marcus Aurelius to keep our feet on the ground. Even Falernian wine is just juice from a bunch of grapes. Well, you can't argue with that. But a little time and that grape juice can become something pretty remarkable. Just as adding honey and spices might make this Pinot Grigio even more remarkable. Maybe not better, but different. So once you've allowed the wine to sit overnight, give it a mix and then strain it. First I strained it through a sieve and then I strained it through cheesecloth. A coffee filter would work as well. And here we are, Conditum Paradoxum, the incredible spiced wine of ancient Rome. Now, even with all of that straining, there is still quite a bit of sediment at the bottom. I don't know how much I'd have to strain it to get it clear, but, you know, whatever. Let's give it a shot. I don't know how I feel. It's very honey-y, but there are a bunch of other flavors in there. There's that mastic and the saffron, and they pop out individually. You know, it's mixed, but they really do pop out individually. Honestly, it just kills the wine. I mean, it is definitely wine. You know, if you put this in water, it wouldn't taste like this. You can taste that it is wine, you can taste that it's alcoholic, but the other flavors are just so overpowering. It's not like a mulled wine or Hippocras. It is. These are the flavors, and it's because of all that honey. But even so, it definitely beats two of the less fancy wines from ancient Rome. There was Lora, a wine typically given to slaves that was made by soaking the grape skins left from previous pressings. Then that would be pressed for a third time to get out every last bit of tannic gunk that they possibly could. The other bad wine, according to Pliny at least, would be wine from Pompeii. He actually said the flavor was okay, but they are found to produce headaches, which often last until noon the next day. Truly the mark of an inferior wine. Nothing like the wonderful wines that you'll get from Bright Cellars when you use my link in the description to get 50% off of your first 6-bottle box plus a bonus 7th bottle. $53 for 7 bottles, I don't mind if I do. Now I'm actually going to try to finish this glass of Conditum Paradoxum because, surprisingly enough, it's starting to grow on me. So yeah, I'll see you next time on Drinking History.